Okay, so hello everyone. This is Gene Jug History, and today I'm going to be covering West Africa, and this is going to be a big one. So, West Africa is one of the world's most culturally, linguistically, and genetically diverse regions. From an anthropological perspective, it's also one of the most historically influential regions, as it was the homeland to or of many major civilizations, empires, and populations that shaped not only Africa but also the Americas through the Atlantic slave trade. So, West Africa generally includes these countries. So, Mauritania, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea Bissau, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, and Cabo Verde is often included politically. So the region stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Western Sahel and transitions from the Sahara Desert to the Sahel to the Savannah to the tropical forest and the Atlantic coast. This the environmental diversity helped create different lifestyles and societies. Okay, so there are some anthropological regions in West Africa. So the first one is Atlantic West Africa, which includes Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And the characteristics involve the Atlantic trade, fishing, rice cultivation, early Islamic kingdoms, and strong oral traditions. The major peoples there are the Wolof, the Serer, the Mandinka, the Timni, the Mendi, and the Fula, i.e., the Fulani. The second group is the Western Sahel, which includes Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The characteristics include the semi-arid climate, camel trade, Islamic scholarship, and medieval empires. Historical civilizations include the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and the Songhai Empire. The third is Forest West Africa. So this includes Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Benin, and southern Nigeria. The characteristics include dense forests, gold production, palm oil, and powerful kingdoms, with the major civilizations including the Asante, Dahomey, Oyo, and the Benin Kingdom. Okay, so there are some ethno-linguistic families. I'm not going to go too deep into them, to be honest. But there is the Niger-Congo family, which is the largest, which includes languages like the Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Iwi, Fon, Wolof, Mendi, Timi, and many others. These languages are spoken by hundreds of millions of people. There's then the Mandi people, which is centered on Mali, Guinea, and Cote d'Ivoire, and it includes languages like the Bambara, Mandika, and Diola. It is historically associated with the Mali Empire. And then the third main one is the Afro-Asiatic, which is mostly in northern West Africa, which includes the Hausa and the Kanuri. These have stronger historical connections with North Africa and the Sahara, which makes sense. Okay, so let's go over shared cultural characteristics. So they historically shared extended family systems, rich oral storytelling traditions, drumming traditions, math traditions, ancestral veneration, age grade systems, market economies, highly developed metallurgy, and long distance trade. When it comes to historical civilizations, some of the most important include the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, the Oyo Empire, the Benin Kingdom, the Empire, the Dahomey Kingdom, the Mossi Kingdoms, and the Jollof Empires. Okay, so when it comes to the historical importance, West Africa has had an outsized influence on world history throughout the development of early ironworking traditions, major medieval trade routes linking sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and the Mediterranean, the spread of Islam through the Sahel beginning around the 8th century, the Atlantic slave trade, during which millions of West Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas, profoundly shaping the cultures of Brazil, the Caribbean, the United States, and elsewhere. And finally, the rich musical traditions that contributed to genres such as blues, jazz, gospel, samba, reggae, and many modern forms of popular music. Okay, so this next section is about why they and their descendants are grouped together, and let's just get right to it. So, the first reason is geography, as they originate from the same broad region. So, West African refers to people whose ancestral homelands lie within the western portion of the African continent. Although there are hundreds of ethnic groups, they share a long history of interaction through migration, trade, intermarriage, shared ecological zones, and regional empires. It's similar to how European encompasses Irish, Greek, Finnish, and Italian, despite the distinct histories between those groups. The second reason is shared deep ancestry. So, modern genetics show that the West African populations are diverse, but many share ancestry from populations that have lived in the region for thousands of years. Major demographic events include the spread of the Niger Congo speaking peoples, the expansion of the Mandi speaking groups, the Sahelian migrations, and interactions with Afro Asiatic speaking populations such as the Hausa. These events created overlapping genetic patterns across much of West Africa, even though each population remains distinct. So, while the Yoruba, the Igbo, Akan, Wolof, and Mendes are not genetically identical, they are generally more closely related to one another than they are to populations from East Asia or Europe or even other areas in Africa, though there are substantial differences even between neighboring West African groups. Okay, so the third reason is the Atlantic slave trade creating a shared diaspora. So this is easily the biggest reason why their descendants are grouped together to get today. So, between roughly the 16th and 19th centuries, so the 1500s to 1800s, millions of people were forcibly taken from West and West to Central Africa to the Americas. Many came from the areas that are now Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Togo, Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mali, though they weren't called those countries once the people, or back in the day where those people were taken from those areas. Once enslaved, captives from different ethnic groups were often deliberately mixed together, making it difficult to preserve distinct identities such as the Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, or Wolof over the generations. As a result, descendants increasingly came to identify with broader categories like African, Black, Afro Caribbean, African American, Afro Brazilian, rather than with a single ancestral ethnic group. Okay, so the fourth reason is the European racial classification. So, beginning in the 15th century, so the 1400s, European colonial powers developed broad racial systems that grouped very diverse African populations together. Instead of recognizing hundreds of ethnic groups, colonizers often labeled people simply as Black, Negro, which is the historical term that is now obsolete, and offensive. These classifications were social and political constructs rather than biologically precise categories. They became deeply embedded in legal systems, colonial administrations, and later census practices. The fifth reason is the shared experiences in the Americas. So, in countries such as the United States, Brazil, Jamaica, Haiti, and Cuba, people with ancestry from many different West African societies experienced slavery, segregation, and discrimination under similar racial systems. Over time, these shared historical experiences contributed to the development of new collective identities, including African American, Afro Caribbean, Black British, and Afro Latino. These identities reflect shared histories and social experiences more than a single ethnic origin. The sixth reason is that genetics still reflect diversity. So even within the African diaspora, ancestry is often mixed. For an example, one African American person's ancestry might include contributions from Yoruba, Igbo, Mende, Akan, Fulani, European ancestors, and indigenous American ancestors. Another person may have a very different combination. This is why modern DNA tests often estimate ancestry from multiple West African populations rather than assigning a single ethnic origin. And the final reason is the modern identity. So today, grouping depends on the context. Anthropology emphasizes the diversity of West African peoples and usually studies them as a distinct populations with unique histories. Genetics recognizes shared regional ancestry while also documenting extensive variation within West Africa. Medicine may sometimes group populations with similar ancestry for research purposes, though increasingly with caution because broad racial categories can obscure important differences. Society and politics often use broad identities like Black or African descent because they reflect lived experiences, history, and social realities rather than precise biological groupings. Okay, so now it's time to do the timeline of West African. So the first period is prehistoric West Africa. So this is from 300,000 to 10,000 BCE. So early humans. Modern humans, i.e., Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa over 300,000 years ago, with the earliest known fossils coming from other parts of the continent. West Africa became home to human populations very early in its history. During this period, hunter gatherers occupied forests, rivers, and savannas. The Sahara was much greener than it is today, and wildlife included elephants, giraffes, hippos, and cattle. Humans lived in small, mobile communities. So the African humid period went from 10,000 to 5,000 BCE. So the Sahara wasn't a desert yet. Northern West Africa contained lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests. Peoples fished, hunted, and began herding cattle. Large communities developed across what is now Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. When the Sahara later dried, many populations gradually migrated south towards the Sahel and forest regions. And then we had the early farming from 5000 to 1500 BCE. So the agriculture spread gradually. Major crops included pearl millet, sorghum, African rice, i.e., domesticated independently in West Africa, yams, and oil palm, while villages became permanent and trade networks expanded. So we had early civilization, so from 1500 BCE to 30 CE. Here are some important developments. So pretty much the Nok culture, which is in Nigeria, or what's now known as Nigeria, it is one of Africa's earliest known iron-working societies. It's known for remarkable terracotta sculptures, iron smelting, farming communities. The Nok culture flourished roughly from 1500 BCE to 500 CE. Then we had the rise of regional kingdoms. So this is from 300 to 700 CE. So trade across the Sahara expanded dramatically. Merchants exchanged gold, salt, copper, ivory, and textiles. Camel caravans also revolutionized commerce too. So now we're in the Ghana Empire, which ranges from 700 to 1200 CE. So the Ghana Empire located mainly in present-day southeastern Mauritania and western Mali, rather than modern Ghana, which that's interesting. I didn't know that. Became West Africa's first great empire. It grew wealthy by taxing trade in gold, salt, and ivory. The characteristics include sophisticated administration, large armies, extensive trade with North Africa. Islam arrived through merchants during this period. So we also have the Mali Empire, which ranged from 1235 to 1600. So it's founded by Sandiata Keita. The Golden Age ranged from the 13th to 14th centuries. The Mali Empire became one of the richest states in world history. Major cities include Timbuktu. I never knew Timbuktu came from the Mali Empire. Anyways, Gal and Guinea. Exports include gold, salt, and cola nuts. So there's also Mansa Musa, which ranged from 1312 to 1337. His pilgrimage to Mecca became legendary. He funded mosques, universities, and libraries. Timbuktu became an internationally renowned center of Islamic scholarship. Then we had the Songhai Empire, which ranged from 1464 to 1591, so a bit over a century. So after Mali declined, the Songhai Empire became West Africa's largest empire. The capital is Gao. It controlled the Niger River trade, the Saharan commerce. Askia Muhammad expanded education, administration, and Islamic law. In 1591, a Moroccan invasion using firearms defeated Songhai, ending its imperial dominance. So we also had some forest kingdoms from 1200 to 1800. So while Sahelian empires flourished, powerful forest states emerged farther south. So major states included the Benin Kingdom, Oyo Empire, Asante Empire, the Dahomey Kingdom. These kingdoms developed standing armies, complex governments, advanced art, and international trade. Benin became especially famous for its sophisticated bronze casting. So we also had the Atlantic trade. So this is ranging from the 1400s to the 1800s. So the Portuguese explorers reached West Africa in the 15th century, soon followed by Spain, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Initially, Europeans traded for gold, ivory, and pepper. Later, the focus shifted increasingly to enslaved people, which leads to the Atlantic slave trade, which ranged from the 1500s to the 1800s. This became one of the most transformative events in West African history. Millions of people were forcibly taken, especially from what's now known as Senegal, Ghana, Benin, Nigeria, and Angola, which is West Central Africa. Many were Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Fan, Mandinka, and Congo from West Central Africa. The slave trade reshaped African societies, European economies, and the Americas in general. It also contributed to the formation of the African diasporic cultures across the Atlantic. So now we're in the colonial era. So this ranges from the 1880s to 1960. So the scramble for Africa divided nearly all of West Africa among European powers. Major colonial rulers included Britain, France, Portugal, and Germany. Colonial governments drew new borders, expanded railways, promoted cash crop agriculture, and introduced Western style schools and legal systems. At the same time, colonial rule often relied on coercion, disrupted existing political structures, and prioritized imperial economic interests. So, the independence period when it came to these countries ranged from 1957 to 1975. Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence in 1957. Soon followed Guinea, Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This period saw the rise of Pan-Africanism and efforts to build national institutions. And now we are in modern West Africa, which ranges from 1975 to the present day. Today, West Africa is home to more than 450 million people. Major developments include rapid population growth, urbanization, democratic transitions in several countries, continued challenges from political instability in parts of the Sahel, expanding regional cooperation through the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, that's the acronym, and growing influence in global culture through music, film, literature, fashion, and sports. Okay, so now is the time to talk about the average phenotype of West Africans. And before I even break things down, there is no single West African phenotype, as West Africa contains over 400 million people, hundreds of ethnic groups, and one of the highest levels of human genetic diversity in the world. Though it is possible to describe the most commonly observed population averages while recognizing that there's considerable overlap and individual variation. So, if we were to look at the overall population average, if you average the major indigenous populations across West Africa, so the Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Mandi peoples, the Wolof, Masi, Iwi, Fon, and many others, a typical phenotype might be described as follows. So, regarding the skin tone, it would be dark brown to very dark brown, which is the most common. There is a broad range from medium to dark brown to very dark complexions. Populations in the drier Sahel often have somewhat lighter average pigmentation than those in humid forest regions, though there is substantial overlap there. When it comes to the hair, it is nearly universally black, tightly curled to tightly coiled, often classified as type 4 hair, and high density and volume. Texture varies amongst individuals, with looser curls or slightly wavier hair occurring naturally in some populations. When it comes to the eyes, dark brown eyes are overwhelmingly the most common. Hazel, green, and blue eyes are extremely rare among indigenous West Africans and usually reflect recent ancestry from outside of the region. Regarding the face shape, the average face is often described as medium to broad, oval to slightly rectangular, and moderately high cheekbones. However, facial shape varies considerably between populations. When it comes to the nose, nasal form shows regional variation. Common averages include medium to broad nasal base, a moderate to low nasal bridge, and a rather nasal tip. Sahelian groups such as the Fulani and some Hausa populations often have narrower noses on average than neighboring forest populations, although there is a significant overlap. When it comes to the lips, they are on average moderately full to very full. Again, there is wide natural variation. When it comes to the hairline and foreline, typically they have a moderately high forehead and rounded hairline. When it comes to the body build, most West African populations average medium to muscular build or a medium to muscular build, strong skeletal development, and moderate limb length. When it comes to the height, on average, the men are between 5'6" to 5'10", and the women are between 5'2" to 5'5". Some groups are taller and others are shorter. So, I'm going to briefly talk about regional differences, as West Africa itself contains several broad phenotypic patterns. So, the forest zone consists of southern Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. On average, they are often characterized by very dark pigmentation, broad variation in facial features, a medium stature, and compact to athletic builds. So, examples of this include the Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Fan, and Iwi. When it comes to the Western Atlantic region, so Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea, they often show a wide range of skin tones, medium facial breadth, moderate height, considerable diversity due to centuries of regional interaction, which we see amongst the Wolof, Mandika, Mendi, and Temni people. And then the Sahel people are groups living near the Sahara, who often average slightly lighter, though generally dark skin, pigmentation than forest populations, longer limbs, narrower facial features on average, and a leaner body build. Examples include the Fulani, Hausa, Songhai, and Mosi, though these are statistical tendencies rather than strict categories. Now it is time to talk about their relationship with race, and it's complicated. So, the first thing we need to do is talk about the historical racial view. So, from roughly the 18th to early 20th century, the European scholars often divided humanity into small number of races, or three of them, essentially. The common framework include categories such as Caucasoid, Mongoloid, as Negroid, and West Africans were grouped into the broad Negroid category. The idea was based primarily on visible physical traits such as skin pigmentation, hair texture, and facial features. And while this is seen as an obsolete and outdated way of looking at race, it was, and in some ways still is, kind of how it's viewed. But note that it was the Europeans who created this, not the West Africans. So, the modern anthropological view. So, today, anthropologists generally avoid treating race as a biological classification. Instead, they emphasize population history, geography, ancestry, genetics, and culture. So, for example, rather than saying West Africans are one race, a biological anthropologist is more likely to describe Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Fulani, Wolof, and Mandinka people as distinct populations that share a broad regional ancestry while retaining unique histories and characteristics of their own. So three, it's time to look at the genetics within West Africa. So West Africans do share ancestry that distinguishes them on average from populations in Europe or East Asia. However, West Africa contains exceptionally high genetic diversity. Many genetic differences exist among West African populations themselves. Human genetic variation is largely continuous across geography rather than divided into discrete biological races. And then the social meaning of race. Although race is not considered a precise biological category, it remains a powerful social reality. In countries such as the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Brazil, people with West African ancestry are often categorized as Black. This reflects shared historical experiences, the legacy of slavery and colonialism, social institutions, legal and census classifications. These classifications are meaningful in social, political, and historical context, even though they do not capture the full diversity of West African populations. Then there's the African diaspora. So this is a result of the Atlantic slave trade, bringing millions of people from West and West Central Africa to the Americas, where many of the descendants today identify with terms such as African American, Afro Caribbean, Afro Brazilian, Black Canadian, and Black British. Within these communities, ancestry often traces back to multiple West African ethnic groups because enslaved people from different regions were brought together over generations. Then there's the West African identity versus the racial identity. So, for many people actually living in West Africa, ethnic identity matters the most and is more central. So, someone might identify first as a Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Wolof, Fulani, Hausa, and Mendi, then by nationality. But the nationality would be the second thing, like Nigerian, Ghanaian, Senegalese, and Malian. The concept of a unified Black identity became important later on when it came to context regarding colonialism, the diaspora, civil rights, and Pan Africanism. But in West Africa, since most of them are Black, they identify either by their country or nationality or their tribe first. Then there's Pan Africanism, which grew during the 19th and 20th centuries as intellectual and political leaders prompted the idea of solidarity amongst people of African descent. This movement emphasized shared historical experiences and common political goals while recognizing Africa's internal diversity. Pan-Africanism contributed to the broader use of identities such as African and Black without suggesting that all African peoples belong to a single homogeneous biological group. Alrighty, and that concludes my video on West Africa. I cannot believe that I'm almost done. Africa, I just have Central Africa and South Africa, the region, not the country, to talk about. Obviously, West Africa is very, very important since it holds so many ties to the Americas via the slave trade. So I definitely wanted to do it some justice, but there's even some elements of it that I didn't even know, and I definitely want to delve more into. I am going to do either East Asia or Southeast Asia next just to get Asia over and done with. Then after I finish Asian Africa, I'll probably do the Oceania. And then I have some other stuff that I'm definitely looking forward to. Anyways, thank you all for watching this video and my other videos, and I'll be back with more content soon. Take care.